Hey everyone, welcome back to the Daily Gold Podcast. Today we're speaking with a new guest. He's Andrew Chanin. He's the co-founder and chief operating officer of Pure Funds, a company that has developed some new ETFs that focus on the mining industry, one of which we're going to talk extensively about. It's an ETF of junior silver companies. But Andrew, first, as we get started, can you tell our listeners about your background and how you came to be a developer of ETFs?
Certainly. Thank you for having me today, Jordan. So, right out of school, I actually was lucky enough to start my career on the floor of the American Stock Exchange as a clerk for one of the largest ETF specialist firms down there. And from there, I got to learn all about the different types of exchange traded funds that were out there, from commodities, fixed income, levered, international, domestic, and it was a fantastic learning experience. And as the there was a migration while the New York Stock Exchange was in the process of purchasing the American Stock Exchange. All of the listings and new listings from the American Stock Exchange actually started migrating to the New York's electronic platform, ARCA, which was going to be the new home for all the ETF products that were listed on the American Stock Exchange. So at a very early time in my career, I was actually sent what they called upstairs, which is where all the electronic exchange trading occurs, and I became a international ETF lead market maker for my firm Kellogg Group. And there I was trading a lot of international funds, global equity funds, and a lot of these new funds that were coming out around this time also had a natural resource kind of exposure to them. And from there, I really started to dig into learning more about the natural resource space and really starting to develop a passion for it. And after being there for a short stint, I ended up joining a prop trading group at Cohen Capital Group. We were a three-man team, and I was trading all sorts of ETFs, from commodities and domestic and international equities to some of the fixed incomes as well, and decided, hey, we have some ideas for some funds. Teamed up with partners there and decided that we would try to find out how to go about and launch our own ETF. So several years later, we in November of 2012, along with the International Securities Exchange, we launched our first three global equity natural resource ETFs under the name Pure Funds.
Okay, and let's get into your thoughts on commodities and more specifically precious metals, because I want to talk more about silver and the junior silver ETF that you developed. Why don't you give us your rationale for developing these ETFs, and maybe secondly, give us some comments on the sell-off that we've seen today. Very, very dramatic sell-off in both gold and silver in the stocks.
Right. So as a trader to start my career, we've my partner, who was also a trader on a metals and mining book and energy book, had a really strong passion for the commodity space as a whole. And we're also not only interested in just the spot prices of commodities, but on the equity side of commodities, being the producers and the service providers that were out there. So we tried to follow the different trends in this space. And at the time of while we were trading, there were many commodity related funds, but not necessarily a ton of them, and realized that there's certainly opportunities to provide new exchange traded fund concepts for these markets that weren't necessarily easily accessible for different investors. So through this process of launching funds, we've also continued our passion of following these markets. And what we've seen over these last couple weeks and since this started this new year has been pretty fascinating to watch. And some of these trends that had been long-term kind of links are slowly starting to fall apart, and not necessarily fall apart in a bad way, but just breaking away from normal trading patterns that we've seen. And one of the most notable ones is that of between gold exchange traded products, ETPs, and silver ETPs. And since the start of the new year, we've seen a large outflow of money from the gold ETPs, as well as a decrease in the spot price for gold. Now, at the same time, we've also seen a decrease in the spot price of silver. But what's been extremely fascinating is that we're actually seeing an inflow of money into these silver products. So usually there's some level of correlation between gold and silver, gold miners, silver miners, and there's some type of correlation that's tended to persist there. But right now we're seeing, although people are selling out and there's outflows and decreases in net asset value of these gold funds, we are seeing an inflow of money into these silver funds as the net asset value is actually decreasing. So we're kind of seeing an interesting break from this, whether it means that people were overweight gold and they want to spread out some of that exposure into silver, or they just see silver as being a better opportunity. It's been a very interesting marketplace, and there's still so much to learn from these different moves. So breaking it down even more, looking at just the last couple of days, I was joking around earlier saying, the price of gold and silver is getting low enough. We might want to throw a cash for gold, cash for silver sign right outside of our apartment. So my roommates weren't too thrilled about that yet, but maybe down the road. And just the timing of everything has been so interesting. We're seeing a lot of different outlets in the media coming out saying that the gold run is over. We've now entered a bear market based on some of the technical terms that people are looking at for gold. But at the same time, you still have the people that the larger players, the central banks out there that have been interested in gold. They're still there and they're still buying, and they're asking for gold. And we've seen just recently the ECB was coming out asking Cyprus for their gold to pay off some of what they owe by selling their gold holdings. So it's very interesting at a time when so many people are coming out saying the gold run's over. We're still seeing plenty of people saying give me your gold, give me some gold. I want gold, and these long-term accumulators of these precious metals are still out there, and they're probably pretty happy with seeing prices where they are.
Andrew, why don't you put your trader's hat on for us and just tell us, in your opinion, from the long side, when do you think we could see a sustainable bottom here in both gold and silver? Could it be? Are we closer to this happening in days, or is it something that is going to take several weeks or a month or two to form?
That's a great question. From one thing that I remember as a trader, one adage that keeps on playing back in my mind is that the markets can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent, and that's always something that I try to keep in mind. So I try to shy away from especially timing calls of any sort. But what we're seeing is you're looking at these silver prices and the spot prices, and they keep dropping. But at the same time, you have to look at the reasons behind this and the reasons for or against one movement or another. And from the positive side, we're seeing to date we're seeing record sales at the U.S. Mint of silver ounces, silver eagles. So apparently there are people coming out en masse saying, prices are down, wonderful, I'll buy even more. Maybe I had $1,000 I was going to put in every month into silver prices or into physical silver or some type of silver investment, but now my $1,000 buys me, this many more ounces. So we're seeing that from one side, but at the same time, when we've had sell-offs in the past, typically human nature is to overextend in one direction. So for me, having some natural resource focused funds, I would love to see a correction sooner rather than later. But as history tends to show, when you have a big price move in one direction, people tend to overshoot those levels. So just looking at technical analysis, it seems that silver's holding a little bit above a support level, but if we do breach that, we could be looking to a much lower handle in the 20s than we're sitting at right now. So the timing aspect of any move is difficult to predict, as I'm sure you and all of your viewers are well aware. But what you need to look at is not just the technical side of it, because like any commodity, there's supply and demand factors that are included in the equation, and you shouldn't ignore those. And as far as the fundamental side goes, although there's a lot of people coming out, and certainly this week, many of the some of the larger banks coming out, putting out bearish calls on the precious metals, there still is that fundamental side. So although some of the big rumblings in the markets and pessimists coming out can move you to different technical levels, I personally don't think a lot of the fundamentals have actually changed there. And one of those strong drivers out there are people buying from the U.S. Mint, purchasing large amounts of silver, and the larger players, especially China out there, they're producing metals, and they're also importing it. So you're seeing a lot of physical metal moving from Hong Kong to Shanghai, and it's something that hopefully could put a floor in there in the near term.
Now, Andrew, I want to get back to silver. You made an interesting point in my previous question, and you mentioned that we've seen huge outflows in the gold ETFs, but not the silver ETFs. And in addition to that, I've also noticed that the silver stocks, their performance relative to silver hasn't been, I mean, it's been better than what we've seen regarding the gold stocks against gold. I mean, as we all know, that's been an absolute disaster, but relative to silver, the silver stocks have actually held up much better. And so I find that interesting. But let's get into the ETF, and why silver, and then why a junior ETF?
Certainly. So one thing that we were doing as traders was we were approaching different issuers in the past, saying, hey, we think that there's interest for this type of fund or that type of fund, and as we'd give them suggestions, their funds would launch, and we would see a pickup in trading and assets under management, and realized there's a strong demand for natural resources, and there's a very strong demand when such products don't currently exist yet. So we, following the natural resource space, have been very interested in silver. And earlier on, as far as the producers go, there was only one fund. Now there's at least two funds out there, non-levered funds out there. But there was never really a junior silver play. There's some junior gold and gold explorer ETFs that did successfully. That did well after the launch of the gold miners funds, the main one out there, and it made sense to us that there's so many commentators out there that love silver too, that the junior space is one that typically they do cover, because there's so many companies out there, and although it's tough to pick individual names out of such a huge basket of companies, that there is demand for junior silver, and these companies are usually investments for people with a higher risk appetite. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that just because they like risky stocks doesn't mean that they shouldn't diversify in these risky stocks. So when you're looking at the junior silver space, which obviously is more speculative than the senior silver space, which is already a fairly speculative type of investment to begin with, the junior space, lots of these companies out there don't have much cash, or they might only have projects that are located in one jurisdiction, or they're currently producing small amounts in one jurisdiction, so they have that going, but they don't necessarily have any other mines in other countries. So when you're looking at individual junior silver names, you expose yourself that much more by not having a diversified basket. to certain risks like company risk or nationalization risk. Now, when we met the ISE to have them help develop an index for us for our junior silver companies, what we were hoping for was a wide range of companies that fell into this space, typically between $75 million and $2 billion market caps that do have projects, not just, in Mexico or Canada or the US. We wanted them with a global reach. So these throughout these companies, there's projects that are on every continent except for Antarctica, and they're all over the globe. So it's an interesting way. So if you're worried that Peru may nationalize their silver mines, you might be hesitant to invest in a company that only has their assets underground in Peru. So finding a diversified basket is a very interesting way to play, and as well as for U.S. investors that might not necessarily have the ability to invest in foreign companies, an ETF, especially global ETF, is an interesting way for them to get this exposure to these other countries.
Right, and I, looking the list of companies, it's available on your website. You can also download a full list, and just looking at the list, I think the companies that you have in here are quite strong. It looks like mostly producers, and there's a couple big development companies, but there's a few there that I'm aware of, and they have some strong projects. That's just in my humble opinion. I'm getting a little off track here, but this is something I was actually thinking about a year or two ago. Like, wouldn't we have the junior gold ETF? Wouldn't it be nice if there was a silver junior, or I should say junior silver ETF? And Andrew, I just think the potential here is huge. I mean, obviously we're in a tough period right now, but I mean, looking at the way silver is traded, you mentioned to me that you took a look at the editorial I wrote today and how silver is following a similar pattern to the 1970s. I mean, I'm not saying there's huge potential over the next 6 months or even year, but I mean, I think looking out over the next 3, 4, 5 years, I mean, if you see silver get over $50 an ounce, I mean, this is going to become a really, really hot space. Is that something that you envisioned?
Right. So to further that point, I mean, when we started the process of launching this fund, I mean, it took us almost 2 years to actually get it from concept to market. And we saw times where silver was sitting in the high 30s, and now it's in the mid 20s. And it's one of these things where you can't time the market to launch your fund. It's a long runway from when you want to launch the fund, but at the same time, we've really been fans of the industrial as well as the investment demand that can come from silver. So, as we've been waiting to get this fund off the ground, we've read hundreds and thousands of different reports on the space, and the industrial case alone for the metal is just an outstanding an outstanding story. And then when you add this increased demand from investment that's just taking silver supply out of the market, it just builds to that story. So we're seeing, like you said, it's really interesting seeing that these gold mining companies are taking even a bigger hit recently than silver mining companies, when silver historically tended to be the more volatile of investments. So it's very interesting seeing that silver has performed marginally better than the gold producers, gold miners, and explorers. But at the same time, we're seeing almost record divergences between the performance of these mining companies versus the actual spot price. So we were talking before about looking at technicals and looking at fundamentals and trying to compare them. Looking at fundamentals from a value perspective, and silver just becomes that much more interesting. So while we're looking at the broad market indicators and indexes out there, your S&Ps and your Dows, and you're seeing record levels, but we're at the same time we're seeing this interesting commodity space that's just been taking a shellacking recently. It seems that it's an interesting time to be looking at this market when when you have people that are saying, hey, the overall market's getting a little bit too hot, it could cool down. We've already started to see a cool down in this metals price that all you need are supply shortages, which some people are saying that they're seeing, especially in the silver price, and it's something that can be a major catalyst in the future.
Andrew, before I let you go, any final comments that you want to make on anything that we haven't covered yet regarding silver or the ETF?
It's something that people definitely need to look at the prospectus and understand the investment that they're making when investing in anything, precious metals or otherwise related. But as far as the prospectus goes, we've done something very interesting, I think, with our 3 ETFs. We've actually put in the prospectus that there's no lending of the underlying non-cash securities of these funds. So it should be interesting to see as we accumulate assets what kind of effect that does have on the underlying companies. And by not allowing for lending of the underlying securities, what essentially this does is it's removing the ability to lend or hypothecate the securities held by the custodian that's actually holding all the underlying assets for these funds. So by not lending out that, we're actually removing a counterparty risk from the investors that you would actually normally see from lending. So additionally, usually when these securities are lent out, typically people are using those borrowed securities to short these actual securities. So I've heard from many people on the management side of commodity producers that they feel that there's been short raids on their stock by actually accumulating assets into these funds will actually be removing float out of the market that can be shorted against. So we're very curious to see what kind of effect that does have, because it's something that we've actually put in the pro, and like you've said, we're still a very new company, so we're really trying to get the word out and really appreciate being on shows like yours and being able to spread the awareness, and hopefully other silver investors will like this type of proposition.
Okay, Andrew, before we close, could you tell our listeners where they can go to get more information in the prospectus?
Absolutely. Our website is Pure ETFs. That's pureetfs.com. And we've got plenty of the information. We've got the holdings up there, and you can see our 3 funds, our junior silver ETF, our diamond gemstone ETF, and our mining service ETF. We're trying to be first to market in very interesting areas. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out anytime.
Okay, Andrew. Well, thanks so much for taking the time today to speak with us. I really appreciate it, as well as my listeners, and I look forward to having you back soon.
I really look forward to it, Jordan.